So today we're going to do medical school interview practice, and it's going to be interactive. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. We know it's close to Christmas. We know that teaching online can be quite difficult, so we really appreciate the time that you've taken out to join us for this, and we hope you get a lot from it. The aim of this is to give you tips and tricks for your interviews and to practice lots and lots. In terms of housekeeping, any burning questions are more than welcome. However, we'll also be monitoring the chat, and there's also a Q&A section at the end. Please do give us feedback. You're going to get a certificate once you complete feedback, and you'll be invited to future events as well. As I mentioned before, we're going to be recording. We won't be recording you practicing your answers, but we're going to be recording most of this so that we can put it on YouTube after for other people to watch. Just as a general interest, I'm wondering if anyone's been able to watch our previous YouTube video and if anyone's had time to prepare answers to questions. If you have, if you can just post in the chat.
I'll get to 7.
Oh, great. Okay. So a couple of people have been able to prepare. That is fantastic. Oh, loads of people. Oh, really impressed. Okay. So this is what's going to happen. We'll give you a bit of background. We'll tell you about the things that you should know. Lots of this is me going to be saying things like, here are a list of topics, go and look them up. In general, you just need to be able to have a very basic conversation. So if you practice with friends, family, teachers, that will be more than enough. Then Eurissa, one of the other doctors here, is going to give you some tips and tricks, and then we're going to do lots and lots of practice. So in terms of background, there are a few different types of interviews. So there's the traditional one, which is like a panel. I'll talk to you more about that. And the Oxbridge one, which is a type of traditional one in that it's a back and forth of questions. You've then got your multi-mini interviews, which are more like short tasks. In terms of COVID changes, as far as I can tell, all medical school interviews are now going to be online. So either live question and answers, or they will send you some questions and you have to do a video submission in terms of your answer. So in terms of a traditional interview, what you get is a panel. They can be a mix of professionals, so they're not all doctors. Keep that in mind when you're answering your questions. A traditional interview is question focused, so they'll be asking you general questions rather than asking you to complete tasks or do role playing. The important thing here is you need to do your preparation. By preparation, I mean look through your personal statement and any essays you've done as any kind of entrance exam and make sure you can answer any question about any part of that. Practice answering those questions. And then also do your research. So the place that you're applying to, what kind of course is it? And what kind of culture do they have? Is there anything particularly special about that place that you can talk about? These are the places at the bottom that you can see. That do the traditional type of interview. As you can tell, Cambridge and Oxford are included here, but on the next slide, you've got your Oxbridge type. So they are traditional in that it's still a panel and you still get asked questions, but the questions might be difficult or bizarre. The point is here, they are meant to be difficult or bizarre, so don't freeze, take a deep breath, show what you're thinking through. If you don't know what to answer, start with what you do know and then extrapolate onto what you don't know. There may not be a right answer. And then you've got the multi-mini interview. So this can be broken down into stations or tasks, and they can really assess anything. There tend to be a couple of different styles of MMI stations. So there'll be a communication one where you do some role playing, you explain things, instruct things, or show empathy in some way. There might be a problem-solving one with the task, so this could be critical thinking or calculations. You can also have short traditional style of questions within the MMI itself. So whatever kind of interview you're doing, it's important to practice answering questions. Most universities do it as an MMI because it allows them to get a better picture of what you're like as a candidate. So in terms of what they're looking for, I've got here aptitude, attitude, communication, motivation, understanding, and experience. So aptitude, how good of a medical student would you make? Attitude, are you enthusiastic? Communication, what are your basic communication skills like? Because this is the kind of thing that they're going to be working with from the start. Motivation, what is your motivation for studying medicine? Understanding, do you understand what it's like to be both a medical student and a doctor? Experience, kind of linked to understanding. So what kind of volunteering or shadowing experience have you got that gives you an insight into the world of medicine? So what aren't they looking for? They're not looking for someone who already knows all the medicine. That's what you're going to medical school for. They're not looking for people that are going to be difficult to teach. So make sure that you can show how open you are and how much you want to learn. They don't want someone that's going to be unpleasant to chat with. I mean, that is probably fairly obvious to all of you guys. And they don't want somebody who isn't going to be open to the opinion of others. In terms of things you should know, so as I warned you, lots of this is going to be me signposting you topics, and then you can look them up in some more detail. I'm going to show you some slides, and again, this is going to be on YouTube, so you can go and find the video later and copy all of the things that we tell you need to learn about. In terms of medicine and your interest or commitment, you should know a bit about the history of medicine, life as a student, life as a doctor, contemporary issues, and show your general interest. So when I say history of medicine, you should have some basic information about history of medicine. You might be asked things like what's an important invention or discovery either in the whole history of medicine or in the last 100 years, or something that you find interesting about it. They'll ask you a bit about life as a student, so they might want you to know what their course is like. There are lots of different types of courses, which we've covered in our previous video. And there's some that also do an extra degree in the middle. You should know whether or not the place that you're applying to has this or not. There are also other exams that we do at the end of medical school. So there's the MLA, the Medical Licensing Assessment, and the SJT, the Situational Judgment Test. You don't need to know too much about them, but knowing that they exist is quite good. And also knowing how your course, the one that you're applying to, is examined is good, because there are lots of different ways that they can examine you. They'll want to make sure that you know about life as a doctor. So what kind of challenges do doctors face? What is revalidation? How do people progress throughout their career as a doctor? And also a little bit about the junior doctor contract, because that was fairly recently. They'll want to talk to you about contemporary issues. So things that I came up with were things like antibiotic resistance, multimorbidity, so the fact that patients are getting older, they're having multiple complex conditions, and a bit on human factors. If you don't know what that is, I would look up the video on Elaine Bromley. It's a really good place to start. It kind of talks about how and where and why mistakes are made. And then in terms of general interests, they might ask you about books, journals, any conferences that you know of or have been to, and then the big news, so talking about COVID and vaccines. In terms of medical ethics and law, they'll want to know all of these things as well. So the 4 pillars of medicine, which I'm sure you guys all know about, which is a really good place to start if you get an ethical question. So you can talk about the different aspects of the question with these 4 pillars. Different ethical frameworks, a little bit on medical law. So these are names of very big cases that have happened that you should know a little bit about. Advanced planning. So a lot of people don't really know what that is. It's planning for when you may not be able to make a decision about your own healthcare. A really important thing to look at. Euthanasia, so the types and what the issues are. Abortion, what the current law is, issues surrounding that, and organ donation, which is quite topical because the law about that has changed recently as well. In terms of medicine and society, so they'll want to know that you understand basically how the NHS works, just not in detail, but generally. They'll want to know your opinions on Brexit implications for the NHS. Again, remember that you don't know who's going to be interviewing you, so be reasonable in your answers. Also, BAME, so healthcare workers, volunteers, patients, and how their ethnicity might affect the care that they can give or receive. And also public health. So public health isn't all about COVID. There are other areas. There's obesity, sugar tax, smoking, and a big one recently is vaccinations. And then they'll want to talk to you about COVID-19 most likely. So not just the UK perspective, but a global perspective. And something that's been spoken about more and more is social media. So what are the positives and negatives about that? So we're going to do some tips and tricks. I don't know if Yurissa was going to take over for this part.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Yurissa. So the next part, we're just going to be going through some tips and tricks. Next slide, Nat. So in terms of the online interviews, it's new for everyone. So I think you should keep these, six different areas in mind. So in terms of your schedule, I'd say it's better to clear your schedule for the day of your interview, because there could be technical problems. They could be running overtime with other interviews. So it's better to just have that day off. In terms of the setting, ensure that you have a quiet space to do the interview in without any distractions. So if you have flatmates or if you live with family, just let them know that you're doing your interview on the day. Try and keep pets away, which could be difficult. And also just clear your surroundings. Try and just have a neutral background and an uncluttered environment. In terms of technology, you need to ensure that you have a good internet connection, because in some cases, if the internet connection doesn't work, they might just not give you a second chance. So make sure you have a backup internet source. Make sure you have chargers for your laptops and phones. And then in terms of dress code, I'd suggest that you just dress as though you're attending the interview in person. So have formal attire on, and then just show your confidence and enthusiasm. Just let that shine throughout the interview. Remember that before answering questions, you can always pause and think for a second and then answer to structure your answer better. Other logistics, always have a photo identification nearby, because they might ask you to hover this over the camera. And then in terms of emails, keep checking your emails before the interview and on the day of the interview, because they might update you and let you know that, okay, they're running a bit overtime and the time of the interview might have changed. Next slide. In terms of a few more tips, in terms of questions themselves, you need to remember that there might not always be a correct answer. So just answer as best as you can. Steps you can use in terms of answering, is to firstly gather information. So ask questions, gather as much information as you can about the scenario, and then try and structure your answers. I will be mentioning 2 tools you can use for structuring your answers in a few slides. And it's also important to show your thinking. So show your thought process and discuss the pros and cons of your answer. So show both sides. Next slide. So in terms of 2 approaches, the first is the STAR approach. So STAR stands for situation, task, actions, and results. So in terms of situation, you'll describe the situation. So for example, if they say, describe a time you showed empathy. So describe the situation, describe the task or what you needed to do in that situation to basically resolve the problem. And then describe how you went about it, so your actions, and then the results. And I think in results, you can also discuss some reflection, because that just shows learning. Next slide. This is a second type of way to structure your answers. So it's called SHARE. Stands for situation, hindrances, actions, results, and evaluation. And basically, it's the same as STAR, the STAR approach, just one extra step of evaluation and reflection. Next slide. In terms of specific stations, so you could get a role-playing station. So for this type of station, it's important to ask questions, clarify the situation, and also understand the situation that you're in. Then be proactive and try and identify and manage the problems, and come up with a plan to manage the problem or scenario. And then finally, always just summarize what you've gone through. Next slide. This might also be another station you are faced with. So making a mistake, again, gather information about the mistake, manage the scenario itself by apologizing, acknowledging the error, and acting appropriately. And then also, again, be proactive and suggest management, a future management plan. And then finally, summarize. Next slide. So in terms of breaking bad news, this is a good approach or protocol which you can use. Again, it's just a framework which is a tool but not a rule. So it's the SPIKES mnemonic. It stands for setting, perception, invitation, knowledge, emotions and empathy, and finally summary and plan. So this is just, you can read up about this in your spare time, but basically an approach to breaking bad news about any type of bad news, really. So you should always just ensure the setting is, the room is well set up, establish what the person you're breaking the bad news to, their existing knowledge. So that's very important. So you can understand where you need to start from, and then also elicit how much they would like to know, and then give them the information, but in bits and pieces, and keep checking up whether they understand what you said, and then always just show your empathy, and finally just summarize and plan. Next slide. Okay, so the weird and wonderful questions. Again, don't panic. They're just basically trying to assess your problem-solving skills and how you think, and how you work under pressure, basically. So again, gather information, use your prior knowledge, show your thinking, shows the pros and cons of your answer, and then finally just plan and summarize your choices. Okay, so now we'll be going into the practice section.
Okay, yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to split into small groups, and there are 3 main sections to this. So we're going to do some traditional interview questions, personality type, motivation and commitment, and ethics. Then we'll do a couple of traditional Oxbridge-style questions, and then we'll do some role-playing. So my plan was to put you guys into small groups, and we'll give you 10 minutes to go through the personality questions, which are on the next slide. So you're going to have to bear with me whilst I split you guys into breakout rooms. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, post them in the chat. It will take me probably 2 minutes to do this, so if you want to grab a glass of water, go for it.